and welcome to Paws for Thought. This week we're looking at the links between animal cruelty and family violence. We'll also talk to a hen expert about the intelligence of chickens and how they understand abstract concepts. Cruelty to animals is horrific in its own right. It's even worse now that research over the past 4 decades has shown that ill treatment of animals is linked to family violence and other forms of abuse. We used to dismiss cruelty by children towards animals as boys being boys, but now we know it's actually a serious warning indicator of possible adult violence. We know that threats, torture and sometimes the killing of family animals are used by violent partners to control women. Often, fear of what will happen to the animals prevents women from leaving violent relationships. If you see neglected or abused animals, the children in that home might also be in danger. Please don't ignore what you see. Contact the police, Women's Refuge, Child, Youth and Family or the SPCA. Ask the woman if she needs help. We have horrific family violence figures in New Zealand. Everyone can do something to help reduce that violence. Now, to talk more about the link between animal cruelty and domestic violence, I'm joined by my guest, Arnja Dale. Kia ora, Arnja, welcome to the program. Can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure, I am a Senior Lecturer in Animal Welfare in the Department of Natural Science at Unitec. I'm also the Vice Chair of the New Zealand Companion Animal Council and I'm also the Chair of First Strike. I also sit on the board at Auckland SPCA and also the Animal Welfare Board at National SPCA.
I'm guessing you attend quite a few meetings.
Certainly do, yes.
What is First Strike?
First Strike is a campaign where we have members from across government and NGOs and charities coming together to form together a platform where we can share ideas and increase the awareness of animal abuse and family violence within New Zealand.
Where did First Strike originate?
It originally started in America by the HSUS, which is the Humane Society of the United States, in 1997, and it's been it's been around for a long time, and it has spread through other countries as well. It's also in Canada, it's also in Scotland, England, and New Zealand.
And how did the New Zealand First Strike group start?
We started with a visit from Randy Lockwood, who is one of the preeminent scholars in the field.
I've heard him speak. He's a great speaker, isn't he?
He is. So Randy Lockwood and Frank Astioni are the two key researchers and pioneers in this field, and we've had both of them come out, so we're very, very lucky for that. So Randy Lockwood came out in 2002, and after that a number of interested parties got together in late 2002, 2003 and started First Strike in New Zealand as we know it today, and it's been going ever since.
So that's pretty much a decade now.
That's right, yeah, we're very lucky.
And really the key idea behind First Strike is that there's a link between cruelty to animals, family violence and child abuse. Exactly. And so the agencies working in those 3 fields to be more effective should try and cooperate.
Absolutely, that is it in a nutshell. It's all about sharing information, supporting each other and a platform to heighten the awareness and get the professionals in the field actually working together functionally.
So what are some of the organisations that belong to New Zealand First Strike?
Well, we are lucky that we have a number of organisations. Some of them took a while to get on board, but at the moment we have the New Zealand Police, we have Plunkett, we have barristers, we have scientists in animal welfare, we have RNZ SPCA, we have Auckland SPCA, we have Women's Refuge, we have one of the Family Campaign and Child, Youth and Family and a number of others as well. So there are key members.
Right, yes, so we can see that there are people from all those three sectors, animal abuse, domestic violence and child abuse,
Absolutely.
coming together.
Yeah. Child Matters particularly represents the child abuse side of things. Yeah.
And what sort of things has First Strike been doing in New Zealand?
Well, we've been promoting our main goal, which is increasing the awareness, and we've been doing that through a number of avenues. We have a website up and running now, which has taken a long time to get, but we're very proud of that. We have a brochure that we have made, which has been sent out for as wide a distribution as possible. We're just in the final stages of a poster for vet clinics, so that vets are able to be more aware of the co-occurrence of animal abuse and family violence. We also have a number of MOUs that First Strike has started.
That's Memorandum of Understanding, isn't it?
That's correct. So the first one we did was between the RNZ-SPCA and Child, Youth and Family, and that's been in place for a few years now, and that's been the predominant goal of that is to get the professionals that are working out in the field talking to each other and increasing the relationship between them, so they're doing a lot more cross-reporting.
So if someone goes out from SIFs to a child abuse notification and they see animals that look in a bad state?
That's correct. So then they would ring their local SPCA inspector. They can also ring the MPI Animal Welfare Hotline, but what we're doing is we're trying to get the SPCA inspectors and the Child, Youth and Family officers working together. And there have been a number of cases recently within the Auckland area where that's been incredibly effective. Often the police are involved with those cases as well, which is a really good resource to have within those sorts of cases. And what we do though is we, Child, Youth and Family do training in terms of identification of animal abuse for all their workers, and likewise there has been some discussions about holding some training sessions for the SPCA inspectors throughout New Zealand to become a bit more training in terms of recognising human violence.
Because that's the whole idea behind First Strike, that if the children are being abused, then there's a possibility that the animals are being badly treated as well. What sort of research is there about that? This field, whilst it's only been going for about 10 years in New Zealand, it's actually, there's been research over the last 30 years. We're very lucky to be able to have some very solid evidence to support our cause that we do see a lot of co-occurrence between different violence types. So particularly with animal abuse, family violence, child abuse, elder abuse, all violence types, we see a co-occurrence. So if we see one type of abuse, there is a higher chance of seeing another type of abuse as well. So particularly where we see animal abuse, there's likely to be other forms of abuse going on within the family unit as well. Yeah. And also research in the States for I think about 4 decades now has showed that animal cruelty in childhood can be a pointer to later abuse.
That's true. There's been a number of studies around the world, in fact, that has demonstrated in some circumstances that children that abuse animals in quite a violent way are more likely to grow up and be violent within their family unit or violent towards other members of society as well, including animals at that point as well. So in that situation we class it as a bit of a red flag. So just to be for agencies to be aware and to actually start some solid intervention programs at that point. But we do know that from other research that if we are seeing children abusing animals, that it's likely that they themselves have been abused. So it really you need to look at the whole picture of what's actually going on. And we do know that children are more likely to abuse animals if they have witnessed abuse or are being abused. So the research is very solid in that respect.
So we all basically have to change our views a bit. It's just like we used to think that domestic violence was, oh, it's just a domestic, it's private, leave it alone, and then we found out that wasn't the case, and so now we've got to recognise that, you know, children torturing animals, sometimes that used to be, oh, that's just boys having fun, but actually it's not. As you say, it can be a red flag.
That's right. It's not so children interacting with animals in an exploratory fashion is one thing, but where there's a high element of cruelty and abuse, that's not just normal childhood behaviour. So that is where we would like to see some intervention at that point. Often people don't really know what to do or where to go, or hope it will go away, but it's certainly something that does need to be addressed either by the family or the whānau or by other agencies that can actually help.
And there's also been some specific research done in New Zealand Pets as Pawns about the links between cruelty to animals and domestic violence, because what domestic violence perpetrators do in some cases is threaten or kill or torture the animal to stop the woman leaving the relationship.
That's right. So the Pets of Pawns project was released last year, and interestingly it echoed all the international research in relation to the statistics that came out of it. So we do know that about 50% of all family violence cases, that animals are also being abused.
It's a really high figure, isn't it?
Yeah, very high. And when we talk about animals, we talk about predominantly dogs and cats, but we also see farm animals, birds, and a range of other species as well, but it's predominantly dogs and cats. We also know that within that statistic, about a third of those animals are abused and resulting in death. So there is a high number of deaths for those animals. And we also know that in households where there is family violence, that the average age of death for an animal is about 2, and there's a very high turnover of animals within that framework. Yeah.
So all the more important this cooperation of first strike between the different agencies to try and reduce these
Absolutely.
figures.
Yeah, and another thing that came out of that research, which is also seen throughout the world, is that women delay leaving the violent situation for fear of their animals, so for fear of further abuse to their animals or retaliation for leaving. So there's been a number of studies that has indicated that within the Pets as Pawns study, the average time from delaying leaving is about 2 years, which is a very long time to put yourself, your children and your animals at risk. But the range for that is anywhere from 1 week through up to 22 years, so it's quite a large range. And an issue with that is people don't really know what to do with their animals in a situation like that. So we, First Strike promotes refuges to also be inclusive of animals as well. We know that it's important for the safety of the animals, but it's also important for the rehabilitation, particularly of the children, and also the women to actually have the animals as part of the family with them in that rehabilitation period. We do know that very few refuges allow animals to be taken, and so what we have is we have certain shelters that will take the animal for a period of time to look after while the women and children are in the refuge. But we do know that money is a reason for people not leaving, because they don't really know where what they can do with their animals. So in terms of paying someone else to look after it, there's also an issue with ownership of animals, so it's important to get all that in order prior to leaving. And whichever refuge you're working with will have full understanding of all that process. Yeah.
Great work. Thanks to my guest, Arnja Dale. Hens are fascinating animals who have complex socialisation patterns and understand abstract concepts. There is now substantial research about the distinctive perceptual, cognitive, social and emotional lives of hens. We humans believe that because hens have small brains, they're stupid. Not so. Rather, birds process information in different ways and in different parts of the brain from mammals. Avian experts Susan Orrose and Gay Bradshaw say that linguistic ability, spatial memory, social reasoning, personality, representation of self, tool manipulation and episodic memory in avian species are comparable to those in primates. Embryo development is complex. Touch emerges only about 6 days after conception and sound at 12 to 14 days. Embryos start vocalising at about day 18, making distress calls known as peeps to their mothers. The hens respond by making clucking noises and gently turning and pecking the eggs. Chickens can also grasp abstract concepts. 3-day-old chicks can identify whole objects when they're partially obscured. Human babies can't do that until they're 4 or 5 months old. Crowing, waltzing, wing flapping and providing tidbits of food are important parts of chicken courtship. Chickens also enjoy dust baths. But in battery farming, hens can't do any of these natural behaviours. Male chickens are not needed in battery farming, so they are killed soon after birth. This is done by maceration, feeding them into a machine where they are sliced to pieces at high speed to kill them. This happens to millions of male chickens in New Zealand every year. In New Zealand, 3 million hens are crammed into tiny cages for their entire lives to produce eggs. They live in a space the size of an A4 piece of paper and can't display any of their natural behaviours. They suffer horrifically, both physically and psychologically. Cruel practices include debeaking the baby chickens, not letting the animals use their wings, overcrowding and forced egg production. Caged hens produce 300 eggs a year rather than the 10 or 12 they would produce naturally. The hens are in cages with 5 to 8 others. There are no windows in the building and there may be 60,000 hens. The conditions lead the suffering hens to peck at themselves and others, behave aggressively and resort to cannibalism. Millions more hens raised to produce chicken meat also suffer horrendously. The so-called enriched cages being introduced in New Zealand are basically no better. Hens will have extra space only the size of a credit card. You can help stop cruelty to hens by keeping hens yourself so you don't have to buy commercially produced eggs, replacing eggs with other ingredients in cooking or buying free-range eggs. Be careful to read the label closely. There are no accurate labelling requirements for free-range eggs, and some egg producers deceive consumers by using pictures or giving their eggs names to make it appear they're free-range when they're not. If you do buy free-range eggs, don't buy the large ones. It's painful for the hens to lay them, so buy small eggs instead. Now, to talk more about hens, I'm joined by my guest, Associate Professor Annie Potts. Kia ora, Annie. Welcome to the program. Can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Oh, well, I'm an Associate Professor in Cultural Studies at Canterbury University, and I also have a background in psychology, which I did my doctorate in, and then I've worked in gender studies, and now my main area is human-animal studies, which is the study of human-animal relationships, and I'm also the co-director of the New Zealand Centre for Human-Animal Studies at Canterbury.
And you're very interested in hens, and you've written a book called Chicken, haven't you? So how did you first get interested in hens?
Well, I grew up with hens. I come from Invercargill, and my father had a quarter-acre section there, as most people of my generation grew up on those kinds of properties in the 60s and 70s, and we had hens, and I suppose I grew up with them really as my friends, childhood friends, and they really taught me about fun and being together, and they were just really fascinating, kind of engaging animals or birds to live around. Yeah.
What are some of the things you learnt about hens writing the book, and I guess having them when you were growing up as well?
Right. I suppose one of the main things that I learnt writing the book was how far we have come in terms of our exploitation and trivialisation of these birds. And it's not long ago, maybe 80 years ago, that we were actually thinking of these birds in terms of, we were admiring them. We revered the rooster for his ability to protect and guard his flock, and we still do, to a certain extent, revere the mother hen for her ability to protect and nurture her chicks. What I found in the process of writing this book was how far we have come away from our connection with hens and roosters and chicks. And it just seems to me now that we're so disconnected from these birds in our everyday lives that we think of them mainly as egg-producing machines or just meat on the table. They're even actually meat before they're killed. In a lot of cases, people just think of them as food when they're alive.
Rather than a living being. Yeah.
Rather than a living, thinking and socialising, feeling being, which of course they are, but they're just treated like objects in Western culture predominantly.
Because it's only about a century ago that we started saying, demeaning and trivialising things like bird brain, isn't it? Before that, actually in our culture, we didn't look down on them as much as that, did we?
No, well, in our culture and also in many other cultures, where both hens and roosters have been the subjects of folk tales, mythology, they've been deified even, and you don't have to go far to find folk tales where these birds are actually revered rather than belittled, and so it's really just since the industrialisation of poultry farming, particularly the intensification of egg farming and the raising of chicks for meat, that we've really started to just have no kind of connection in that way with them at all. In fact, we're almost incredibly negative towards them now. We call them bird brains, and people are chicken if they're cowards, if they're seen to be cowardly, but in actual fact chickens are anything but cowards.
But that's probably, we need to do that to kind of assuage our consciences, because if we recognise that they are intelligent living beings, we wouldn't keep treating them the way that we do. Now, hens are actually very intelligent. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, well, I mean, even from a very young age, hens and roosters are intelligent. They, as chicks, even just 3-day-old chicks, are able to grasp abstract objects, which is kind of incredible when you think about it. A human baby takes at least 5 months to be able to do that. And what that means is that if you had an object in front of a chicken, you can see that if you hide half of that object, they will still be able to identify what the object looked like as a whole. Also, if you hide an object from a hen, and then the hen is asked to go and find that, she can do that, where children, very young children can't do that. So even from a very early age, chicks and hens and roosters can do these kinds of what is called abstract thinking. And the other thing that I think people don't realise about hens is that they have these, or actually flocks of chickens have incredible means of communicating. They actually have what I would call a language. They have semantics and syntax, which were once thought to be the hallmarks of human language.
So how do you know that?
Well, for example, in one experiment that was performed in Melbourne by Chris Evans, who's a very famous avian behaviourist, he had hens listen to sounds of aerial or ground alarm calls that a rooster might make or another mate might make in the wild. And aerial alarm calls are made if there's a predator approaching from the sky, and the ground alarm calls might happen if a dog or a cat is approaching. They have different sounds, but without any visual cues, the hens could identify that sound meant that there was a danger coming from the sky, for example, and they would crouch and go and hide and crouch. Whereas with the other call, they would know to kind of hide, but also to be ready to approach the predator with a loud response, which is how they frighten away. Aggressive response. So they didn't have anything that showed them what was happening. It was just a visual, an auditory cue, which showed that they had this representational thinking and could tell the difference between the different types of calls.
So, given that hens are so intelligent and have complex socialisations, it makes it even worse how badly we treat them by having them in battery cages. Why is that so bad for them, and how do they actually suffer?
Well, I mean, in nature, They would live in small flocks and have little territories. They would perch in the trees at night to go to sleep. They would have enough space between each other to maintain safe social arrangements, which is very important to a flock of hens, is to be able to recognise each other and know where you stand in the pecking order. And that way you avoid fighting and you get on harmoniously. Well, if you're in a cage with, crammed cage with flock mates, but you have no way that you can turn around or avoid one that is not particularly, fond of you, or also you've got nowhere to perch, you've got nowhere to nest when you want to lay an egg. I mean, you can just imagine. But one of the worst things about all of these systems, whether they are so-called enriched environments for caged hens, like the colony cages that are going to be brought in here, or not, is that they have no sunlight the whole of their lives. They live in false, unnatural light. They never see rain or grass. They don't get to forage. They don't get to perch in trees and feel safe from predators that way. So really, their whole, what I call their earth rights, have been removed from them. They've been unnaturalised, really.
Yeah. So how can people in New Zealand best help hens if they are concerned about battery cages and the conditions the hens are in?
Well, the government has said that it's moving to colony cages within, well, they say 10 years, but this keeps changing now that they're saying they're going to stagger out the time that the battery cages have to be removed from New Zealand. So we need to keep pressure on the government, keep lobbying that we do not want our eggs to come from unhappy hens who have never seen daylight, never been able to move properly in their cage. I mean, the new colony cages that are being proposed actually don't give the hens any extra space in terms of normal behaviours. They give them a place to perch, but they give them a nest, but if you have 60 other hens in a cage, which the colony cages will have, and they're all wanting to nest at the same time, we can see that the hierarchy that hens have, the ones that are at the bottom of that hierarchy will not get to lay the eggs in the nests, and there's going to be increased stress for these hens as well. It's really no better. Right.
So the best thing people can do probably is buy free-range eggs then.
Free-range systems have their own problems as well. I mean, when you're thinking of, say, 30,000 hens on a free, or say let's say that's 5,000 on a free-range system, you also then have to think that 5,000 young male chicks have been killed from that industry, because we have to think also of where the other half of the eggs that are hatched are going, and they're just being killed. So free-range systems aren't free of problems. If you're an animal welfare or animal advocate, you need to think about that. But the best way, I think, is to have your own hens if you can, and to make sure that they live as natural lives as possible, and you check that they're happy hens.
Right.
So I'm not really, I can't say I'm an advocate exactly of free-range farming as well, because of what happens to the male chicks. But in terms of the hens that come through free-range, it's certainly much, much better than the colony or battery cages.
Thanks to my guest, Annie Potts.
Thank you.
Hens are intelligent, socialise in complex ways, and understand abstract concepts. They suffer horrifically when confined to cages with their beaks partly chopped off. Hens can use each eye independently to focus on different distances at the same time. Both of their eyes together weigh as much as their entire brains. Hens have acute hearing and an auditory frequency range of 15 to 10,000 Hz. You can keep hens at home and enjoy both their company and cruelty-free eggs, knowing that you're not contributing to suffering. You can use applesauce as a replacement in recipes for eggs. Protest against plans to delay even further the phase out of battery cages and the bringing in of colony cages, which are virtually no better than battery cages. That's our program for this week. Thanks for watching. Join us next week when we'll have delicious food in the studio. Alice Shopland from Angel Food will bring along treats for us to taste, and world-famous author Geoffrey Masson will join us. His books include The Pig Who Sang to the Moon, Dogs Never Lie About Love, and The 9 Emotional Lives of Cats. Ka kite anō.